Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. The Adani crisis has been roiling the company's stocks and to some extent the broader markets as well for the better part of the last week. Much of the budget session of Parliament has been held hostage to this burning issue. In fact, the budget, as good as it was, seems to have been hostage to the entire Adani issue. But today, for the first time, a senior government minister, no less than the finance minister herself, has responded to the Adani crisis in what is her first interview to a private news network. We will play that out in just a moment on what Nirmala Sitharaman said about the Adani crisis. But the bigger question we're asking is, and this is a sentiment that the finance minister echoed, is the Indian stock market bigger than just this one company, and can it ride out this storm much like it did in the past with Wockhardt and Satyam and Harshad Mehta and Ketan Parekh? But first, the story so far.
Well, Indian financial markets are governed. There's never a compromise. One instance, however much talked about globally it may be, I would think it is not going to be indicative of how well Indian financial markets are governed. Indian banking sector today is at a comfortable level. India remains as before absolutely well-governed, stable government and also very well, regulated financial market.
सेबी और आरबीआई तो दो संस्थाएं हैं जिनको जांच कराना जरूरी है, पर हम मानते हैं कुछ निष्पक्ष जांच की जरूरत है।
सेबी ने भी इनको फेल किया है, सरकार ने भी उनको फेल किया है, इसीलिए हम चाह रहे हैं कि एक जॉइंट पार्लियामेंट्री कमेटी का गठन हो।
And first up, an exclusive interview with Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. This is the first senior government official to speak on the Adani controversy, with Adani shares nosediving, and we're the only network in India right now which has the exclusive comments of the Finance Minister herself. This is what she said in an exclusive interview, the first to a private television channel right after the budget. She spoke exclusively to Network 18's Group Editor-in-Chief, Rahul Joshi.
Your budget was very well received by the markets. In fact, while you were speaking, the markets were really going up. But the rout in the Adani stocks somewhat spoiled the party. There is a general nervousness in the market. How does your government see this?
I look at the budget for having covered all the sections of the society. We've tried, and it has been a detailing that which has consumed a lot of time in preparation of this budget. The details is what has brought the difference in touching so many different sectors and segments of our society. We've got something on offer for each one of them. So therefore, if it's being received very well, I'm very glad. But of course, that motivates me to be able to now take it upon myself to better implement it down to the last person who's aimed at. So I would think the impact of the budget, the immediate impact of the budget on the market, and subsequent to, let's say, for whatever reason it trailed back, I think in the next few days the budget's impact will still continue to hold the markets high.
The opposition is taking aim at your government, saying that the banking and insurance companies have large exposure in Adani stocks. And the investors and the broader market is looking to you for some direction on this issue. Is our banking and insurance system resilient to take this shock?
I want to recall the words, coming from the horse's mouth has greater credibility. Both SBI and LIC have issued detailed statements. And I know the chairperson or the CMD has himself come out and explained how they are not overexposed or whatever they said. Yes. And also said, look, we are sitting over profits for the exposure that we have, which is well within the limit. That's what I understand they have said, and I've again read it through the media. They have very clearly said that their exposure is very well within the permitted limits, and that they are even now, with the valuation falling as well, they are still sitting over profit. So if that is the horse's mouth, as I refer to, word from the horse's mouth, but in general, both with the RBI, we do have the Financial Stability Board's meeting, which happens once in 6 months. We meet, even recently we have met. So I can only very clearly say, both the RBI and we, because of the FSB's meeting, Financial Stability Board's meeting, know that the Indian banking system, if anything, at this stage, for me to use this word, I want to use it with a sense of responsibility, like having gone through the twin balance sheet problem, Indian banking sector today is at a comfortable level with their NPAs coming down to absolutely low levels, recovery is happening, and their position is very sound, which gets reflected in the fact that when they go to raise monies in the market, they are absolutely comfortably raising monies as well. So the entire macroeconomic analysis which any expert would do also highlights the fact that how comfortable the Indian banks are placed in. That cannot be that if they are at risk.
Some of the global investors as well, as a knee-jerk reaction, seem to have pulled out some money in the last couple of days. Some have put, fresh investments on hold. What would your message be to the global investors?
India remains, as before, an absolutely well-governed, stable government and also very well, regulated financial market. And as a result, I think the investor confidence which existed before shall continue even now. Our regulators are normally very, very stringent about certain governance practices, and therefore they should, one instance, however much talked about globally it may be, I would think is not going to be indicative of how well Indian financial markets are governed. So many lessons have been learned over the decades, and therefore I think our regulators have kept our market well in prime and prim condition.
All right. One instance, howsoever much it is talked about globally, does not reflect the strength of the Indian financial markets. Let me go across to our full panel joining us. That is the first big reaction from no less than the finance minister herself on the Adani controversy. Arun Anand is consulting editor with First Post, Deshratan Nigam, lawyer and political analyst, advocate Matthew Anthony, spokesperson of the Congress Party, Gaurav Chaudhary is consulting editor with Network 18 and co-founder and CEO of Earshot Media, Gurcharan Das, senior economist, and Arvind Bali will be also joining us, CEO of the Telecom Sector Skill Council. Let me start with you, Arun Anand. What the finance minister essentially is saying is there are thousands of stocks that are publicly traded in the Indian stock markets. Just because one company and maybe a handful of stocks have gotten beat over the last week or so, that does not reflect the strength of the broader markets. And that's borne out by how the markets have played out in the aftermath of the budget. On all of the last 3 days, they have ended up in the green despite the Adani stocks falling as much as they have done. Would you agree with that, or would you disagree?
No, I will, absolutely agree with that. In fact, even though the Adani stocks were falling today also, but the market was rising. And if you look at, technically also the weightage of Adani Enterprises in the overall, Sensex. So it's in the index. So the weightage is quite low. So I don't think it's going to... See, the thing is that it's an election year. So, and it was you see the timing, what is happening. And Congress has been pretty upfront about, targeting Adani. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't understand why this should be discussed in the parliament. Because most of the public sector banks and other investors, the institutional investors, have already come out with, clarification. Why do they need to stall for one particular business house? Why do they need to stall? I fail to understand, but I think it's largely, it has turned into a political kind of fight.
Okay, so let me ask Deshratan Nigam that, and I think that's a fair point. I don't think one company or one set of stocks, maybe 6 or 7 of them, represent the strength or otherwise of the Indian stock markets. And it's clear from how the financial markets have performed despite the beating of the Adani stocks. The question that the opposition is asking is, why then run away from some kind of an investigation? They believe, rightly or wrongly, that this entire thing is a scam. The best way for the government to clean up, or at least to show that it has nothing to hide, is to say, yes, let's have a JPC, let's have an inquiry, let's find out.
Zaka, let me point out that we have a very robust financial regulation system like SEBI, and there are other, institutions also under various provisions under the Companies Act as well. And therefore, if we bypass that system, they become redundant, like SEBI. Now, if you take over the functions of SEBI, what will SEBI do? SEBI is, I'm sure, keeping a watch on the entire system. So to have a JPC on this issue is not even required, because there are even stock market and the other, were watching it very closely. They have issued statements and rightly pointed out that the exposure of, say, for example, LIC is 0.9% and 70% profit still, despite the lowdown.
Okay.
So it was certainly a storm for the Adani group, but a storm in a teacup for a stock market. So a stock market has already withstood it and is still rising.
Okay, so let me ask Advocate Matthew Anthony. I mean, the stock markets are rising. It is, as Deshratan Nigam said, a storm in a teacup for the broader markets. It represents less than 1% of SBI's loan book, and again, less than 1% of LIC's exposure. So what then is the opposition creating such a shindig about?
Thanks and good evening for having me to have this debate. Let me put it across to you very clearly. The question is about a fraud. The question is about an 88 questions raised on Adani's business transactions, business routing, and accounting scam. That is a question. It's a question of ethics here. And then, if LIC and SBI has invested on this one, where Adani is failing to come out with a descriptive answer for the questions raised, nor even moving ahead with his threat of suing the research company for the report, without moving much on that one. The question is on the moral and ethical side of investment, on how the LIC and SBI, which is largely a PSU enterprise, made the investment decisions without looking into such things, or whether they have overlooked it or not.
Advocate, let me just clarify. Let me just clarify on 2 points. No, one second. If yes, you're alleging, and I'm willing to meet you halfway. If you're alleging, as the Hindenburg report seems to suggest, there was round tripping, ethicality, criminality, so on, there are multiple options, legal options that are available in front of you. Of course, there is the regulator SEBI, which has to order an inquiry. The RBI, I believe, has already asked banks for its exposure to Adani. And most importantly, you can file a criminal complaint, you can approach the courts. Why ask for a joint parliamentary committee? Why hold up the business of the House when this company, as the SBI chairman said, represents less than 1% of the loan book of the biggest public sector bank in this country? You're holding up Parliament. Hundreds of crores are being wasted on this one company, when there are avenues, multiple avenues available to you to probe whether there was any criminality or whether there was any lack of morality in this alleged sort of round tripping, as you're saying.
How much of the Parliament's time was used for Vijay Mallya's case, when it was not even 1% of SBI's exposure? How much of the time was used for the 2G scam, when the court has acquitted everybody from that one? And how much of the Parliament's time was used for that one? You didn't have any concerns at that point of time, because it was raised by the opposition at that point of time against the government. Now, there is a direct allegation against this particular business house that they are working in tandem with the ruling party. And the rules of the government has been leveraged to benefit this party, to benefit this business group at any given point of time. And it has come out in the form of a research. I am asking this question: why is Adani not taking any legal action rather than just coming out with a press statement?
No, they have said that they will take legal action against this research firm.
Do you need so much of time to take a legal action?
How and in what form they will proceed, it's for them to decide. But let me ask, Gaurav, I think one of the points that the opposition is making is, this is not any other company, right? This is one of the biggest conglomerates in the country. And the opposition, rightly or wrongly, feels there are deep linkages between this company and the government. So isn't it incumbent on the government to say that, look, we have nothing to do with this company, let the law take its course, and whatever investigations there need to be done, let the investigations happen? The government hasn't said that yet.
So what the government, I see, on the opposition's charge, I think the opposition's charge is on favoritism, that this group has actually risen to a certain height because it happens to be the favorite of this government, and that is why its books needs to be opened up for further public scrutiny and also for parliamentary scrutiny. That is one point. But what the finance minister today said is that the exposure of SBI and LIC, which the opposition says is, I mean, these are institutions that are too big to fail in the technical sense too. And if their exposures, if they have very massive exposures in a group that is, facing the rout in the stock markets, then that needs to be investigated. But the finance minister said that the exposures are within permissible limits. And shortly after finance minister told Network 18, the SBI chairman came out and said and quantified that exposure less than 1%. In fact, it's 0.88% of the total loan book, and likewise for LIC too. And in fact, despite the rout, and on the exposure, both the institutions are actually sitting on profits. A couple of hours after the finance minister's interview, the RBI has actually came out with a statement, not without naming the Adani Group, but has said that, as per the RBI's current assessment, the banking sector remains resilient and stable. And there is a monitoring purpose too, and there is a monitoring system too, which is called the large credit database system, where credits, any credit above the value of rupees 5 crore is actually monitored by the RBI. Okay. Now, be that as it may, I think another point that the finance minister also made is that India's financial market regulatory system has a very strong architecture, both the RBI and the Securities Exchange Board of India. Yeah. And if anything were to happen, then they'll take, and the best practices are already in place. They're ring fences. The rules and laws are very well defined. So I think it is first for the SEBI and the RBI to investigate, examine the books, and if anything is amiss, then it should go to the Parliament. Okay, because I think that's a fair point, and I want to extend that to
Gurcharan Das. We have seen in the past in the Indian financial markets, in the Indian stock markets, some of these cases that have really blown up, whether it is the Wockhardt hospitals, whether it is the Satyam scam. I don't even want to go to, Harshad Mehta and Ketan Parekh. Leave that aside. But from all of those episodes, as the finance minister said, we have learnt our lessons. Our regulators have learnt their lessons. So surely they are capable enough, they have the instruments required to get to the bottom of this particular episode. So the government is leaving it to them. The opposition says that's a cover-up. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I think you're right, that really it's the job of the regulator. However, we are a democracy. And we are a democracy where capitalism is still trying to find a comfortable home. So it is in such a democracy. I think if they want to have a parliamentary thing on it, is a democratic right of the opposition as well. So I would say that fine, let's play. We all as citizens want to know. The difficulty that in emerging markets is of crony capitalism, and so all of us want to know what is the truth, and let the regulators say, and if the parliament also wants to do it, let them do it. I think, it's the price we pay for being a democracy.
No, so the larger question that needs to be asked, Arvind Bali, is what Gurcharan Das said. This phrase crony capitalism is something that we've been hearing since definitely 2011-12 when the 2G scam blew up. That was the phrase that was used when 2G happened, and then subsequently when we had the NPA crisis and the sort of taper tantrum and the dollar crisis in 2013. Again, we heard this phrase crony capitalism. Now, a good 10 years later, the opposition is saying this episode best exemplifies crony capitalism. It's almost like the Indian capitalism story, as it were. I will say, the Indian economic liberalization story over the last 30 years since 1991. Just can't seem to get rid of this phrase and this problem and this anomaly called crony capitalism.
Yeah, so it is, I think, something very simple. Stock market is a free market, like where every individual investor, every bank, everybody decides to make investment. and like they know that what is happening, they have their own decision making. But problem is, when something goes wrong, at that stage, everybody starts blaming each other, especially because opposition gets a chance to blame government on that. I think all the decisions, whether the way prices goes up, it is a clear demand and supply. It is not something which is managed by any individual. It is market driven forces it decides. But then when the prices goes down, then I think you just find whom to make the scapegoat. And definitely, for opposition, is always government which is there. I think we have seen it in many cases. Like when we see all IPOs, when it comes, people make huge money. There's always upside. But if few IPOs fail, then they start blaming the government, or they blaming the state, blaming the people that it was not, or there was something or the other going wrong. So recently there was sometime back there was a IPO. When that IPO failed, everybody was blaming this was not done, that was not done.
Excuse me.
But when people make double the money, triple the money, that time nobody complains.
Okay.
So in my opinion,
I think the point of concern is how much exposure do public sector institutions have to this particular set of companies? Because that, at the end of the day, is public money. Otherwise, whatever monies this company has made, it's done so through the stock markets, through investors who knew fully well what they were getting into. They invested in these set of companies on the hope of profit, and that's the risk you take. But on the public sector exposure, we have the SBI chairman who spoke to our sister channel CNBC TV 18, and a specific question was asked to him about the exposure to the Adani Group, and this is what he had to say, and I'll come back to our guest right after this. Yeah.
So if you could actually elaborate, 0.9% of SBI's loan book is the total quantum of your exposure to Adani. If you could give us the absolute figures in terms of what is the fund-based and non-fund-based exposure in total to Adani.
It is everything put together.
So if you could give us the breakup.
I would not. I think non-fund-based exposure, I would only like to mention that they are essentially letter of credit and the bank guarantees, and these bank guarantees are the performance bank guarantees. And this is not against any of the equity raising or any such activity. We actually breakup wise, maybe Swami, would you like to add something? If at all you have, or maybe you can.
Breakup debt from us, and including a small investment of about 285 crores. So in all, the exposure total is about 0.88% as on 31st December. And as you clarified, sir, there is nothing which is against acquisition or against shares in this. Ritu, if you require any other granular data point that we can share offline with you.
In fact, we have not issued any guarantee towards securing any of the financial obligations or acquisitions either. So as I mentioned, that these are all performance guarantees or the financial guarantees, but done and which are required in the normal course of business.
All right. So he's clarifying two things, and I want to ask Advocate Anthony this. Number one, that the loan exposure is less than 1%. It's about 23,000 crores when the entire loan book is over 20 lakh crores. And secondly, this is basis assets as collateral. None of this is basis shares as collateral. So I think on both of those issues, the SBI chairman has clarified. And frankly, the only public interest is the exposure of public sector enterprises, whether it's LIC or SBI, to Adani. Otherwise, all the money he has raised, and call it whatever you want, Hindenburg can call it fraud, round-tripping, whatever it is, that's between his investors and him. That has nothing to do with the public.
I have a couple of points to be raised to you. That is, the recent past, we have seen Satyam, and we have also seen Island FS collapse here. Both these companies, the exposures in the stock markets were relatively much lesser. At the same time, you can see almost $115 billion equivalent value erosion happening in the stock market basis on a report. And you have also seen this government acting on even the slightest of the allegations, using an ED, Enforcement Directorate, CBI, and the serious fraud offense officers, all put into utilization when they have a smallest of the allegation coming against it. There is a retail investors who doesn't know an iota of this, but had the trust in this company, now being ripped off of their investments. And I agree that the stock market is a profit and loss agreed market known by the investors. But at the same time, this is an unprecedented value erosion on a particular group stock. So what is the government doing about it for the retail investors?
No, again, I keep coming back to this. Once again, advocate, whether or not investors lost money, and this 100 billion that you're talking about is not public money that's been lost. It's money that investors gave to this company, knowing full well that those investments would run sour.
I disagree.
I don't think there is public interest that is served or otherwise in that money, except of course the LIC exposure and the SBI exposure. Otherwise, it's investors. You want to invest in this company, you invest. You don't want to invest, you don't invest. That has nothing to do with public interest.
You made a statement that they made an investment.
Yes.
Fully aware about the company's details. Now, that fully aware part is being questioned. That is being considered as doubtful. That is being charged as fraud. And now, in the last 2 weeks' time, what has Adani done apart from saying, you have got 14 days or you have got 10 working days? What has Adani done apart from the statement to make a legal procedure against the company which has produced a report in their land?
How it chooses to legally respond? I mean, they put out a statement saying that they will be suing this particular research firm.
Do you take so much time
how they do that is up to them. Like I said, I'm coming back to the question of what is the public interest that is served or not. But Arun Anand, I think to be fair to Advocate Anthony and the rest of the opposition, what they're saying is when Satyam happened, when Wockhardt happened, when other so-called quote-unquote scams happened, there were multiple investigations. SEBI got into the act, the RBI got into the act, because the prevailing sort of understanding, the prevailing basis was that investors, retail investors, have been taken for a ride by promoters of these companies. Now, again, I'm not saying all of what Hindenburg is saying is true, but even if there is an iota of truth in what Hindenburg is saying, isn't it the moral responsibility of investigating authorities, regulatory authorities, to find out if there's any truth in what this firm is saying?
You're absolutely right. It needs to be investigated, but as you have said, that there are regulatory authorities, and there is a standard operating procedure. That's why you have regulatory authorities, so that if any this kind of thing happens, so they can because it needs a very specialized kind of investigation. So when you talk about JPC and this thing, the Harshad Mehta scam was different. It was some trader who was manipulating the stock in the market and basically using the public money. So that is why JPC was required at that time. But now I don't think that there is a need of JPC. But yes, there is a need for investigation. And if the regulators feel that it needs a larger investigation within the policy framework also, so probably then, they can recommend the... so at least I think we should not jump the gun. And if
Gaurav, what the opposition is saying, and again, this is their point of view, they are saying that, look, Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. This particular company is not just any company. The linkages with this government are very well known. So it must not just be above board, but it must be seen to be above board. That is what they're questioning. They're saying that the government is not doing enough to show that they are, hands off on this. Whatever investigators need to do, they do. And at the same time, they go out of their way to show that, look, we are putting public interest first. So if public money is there, which quote unquote has been taken for a ride, as Hindenburg says, then we need to get to the bottom of that. That's what the opposition is saying. Do they have a point?
So I'll just refer to two cases that have been cited here. One is the Satyam case. In the case of Satyam, in 2009, the promoter of Satyam actually came out and made a stunning confession that he had doctored the books of accounts for several years. So it was a confession by the promoter itself, and the criminality was, it came through an act of confession by the promoter himself. In the case of Vijay Mallya, and the Vijay Mallya case has also been cited, and it said that so considerable amount of parliamentary time has been expended on discussing the Vijay Mallya case. But in the case of Vijay Mallya, it was a loan default, and it was a loan default it was a loan repayment default by the group, by the company that Vijay Mallya at that point used to own and run and was the promoter. and the consortium of banks was not returned loans to the extent of about 13,000 odd crore. And then an FIR was filed, and the complaint was, in that case, complaint was brought about by the banks themselves. So in most of the cases, in the loan default cases, the banks themselves have brought in the complaints because the borrowing company had defaulted on the loans. In this case, it is a research report by a third party, and there has been no complaint yet by any of the lenders yet. If they have been at the receiving end of their loans have not been repaid, or they have been default on repayment of loans, etc. I think that the first thing of flagging that will come from the lenders themselves, and those checks and balances are now well and truly in place, and that is what the finance minister was today trying to say when she said that India's financial markets are very well regulated because of the various instances and the experience over the last several decades. But having said that, on the point whether this particular group is seen to be too close to this government, and that is why the government should go ahead and actually go the extra mile to launch an investigation, that is a fair point. But that investigation has to be first launched by the regulators in public interest rather than Parliament itself, because this requires very specialized investigation, and that is the SEBI and the RBI are the two first investigators that should actually examine what has been put out.
So let me ask Gurcharan Das. So, do you agree with Gaurav's point that in the case of Vijay Mallya, for example, it was the lenders and the loan was defaulted on, they were the ones who sort of raised the issue first. That is materially different from a historically known short-selling firm coming out and saying that this is our research, this is what we believe, and therefore we are going short on this stock. It's apples and oranges.
Yeah, well, I think that he's right, and there are differences. However, it's a bigger issue in the sense that India is frankly a young country, and certainly our economy only began from 1991. So we are a very young country. We are establishing institutions. There's a lack of trust. And what it is, therefore, I would say that anything we can do now as a country to bring transparency into the system. I mentioned the word crony capitalism last time. Now, that's the view of a lot of people. And that's not a good thing to have. Many countries go through this. America went through this stage. And so I would say, in the interest of creating trust, I mean, opposition will always try to find, particularly when they have nothing else to talk about, they will try to latch on to any kind of news.
Okay.
I would just say that if everything we can do, the regulators, absolutely, regulators have the job first. But there's a lot of distrust of regulators in our country. The regulators are they were supposed to be independent, but they are often retired officials of the same department. That's why the railway privatization thing, it didn't get bidders because the regulator was a former railway person. So I feel that there's a lot. India still has further to go. I completely agree with the view that things have improved. But what we are doing is carrying baggage also from the past. And
I'll give Mr. Bali the final word. I think the larger point that needs to be made is, and I think Gaurav is right, when Kingfisher defaulted, it was not just about one company. The broader market was affected because of it. When the Walkard scam came to light, it was the entire market that got affected by it. So was the case with Satyam. Here in this instance, at least in the last 3 days since the budget got presented, and the government's view may be that, the budget itself got hijacked because of this entire scandal. But the fact remains that for the last 3 days, despite this Adani crisis, the broader markets have ended in the green, and substantially so, including today where it ended more than 400 points up. So doesn't that show the limited nature of weightage of the Adani group of companies on the broader markets, and B, that the broader markets are looking at other factors, not just this one set of companies?
No, I think it is mainly because it has become a very big issue. I also invest in US market, and there's a car maker in US, so their stock tanked like anything. But then, there was no such issue, not big debates. And within few weeks, it returned back, it came back quite substantially. I think here also, I think time should be given to such companies, because ultimately, it is not that it is everything is sentiment, the kind of sentiments you create in the stock market. And now, so much of negative sentiments have been created, then obviously, it is going to have an impact. So the best is, I think such things should be left, because, when the investigation starts, there's further negativity, a lot of negative news, and negative news ultimately keeps bringing the stock down. The best is, I think all such companies should be left the way,
okay, I got to wrap up. I'm completely out of time. I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but I will just end by saying that sentiment or otherwise, I think that's a very ephemeral sort of thing in the markets. Ultimately, any company will be judged by its fundamentals. And if you're an investor out there, judge by the fundamentals of this group of companies, whether or not you believe it has the staying power, it has the finances, it has the ability to repay its loans, or whether it is over-leveraged and overexposed. That's a call that individual investors have to make. Meanwhile, we'll take a quick break here on the program. When we come back, will a suspected spy balloon that was hovering over Montana in the United States worsen what is already frayed ties between Beijing and Washington? There is an upcoming visit of the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to Beijing, which is really now in the crosshairs after this incident, this bizarre incident and its ramifications, right on the other side of this quick break.